He must have been about 60 years of age. He was far from home, in a foreign land, and he was in jail, convicted of a crime that he did not commit. We know him as Saul of Tarsus, who became the Apostle Paul. And from a Roman prison, he wrote our text today, in which he said, I can do all things through him, Christ, who strengthens me. How remarkable that is. There could be many, many things that he could have said. I don't like being chained to these soldiers, confined to this place. But he said, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. You know, one of the easiest things in the world is to be negative. Takes no effort whatsoever. A little child can say, I can't. He may begin by saying, I can't tie my shoes. Later he may say, I can't ride a bike. When he gets into college, he may say, I can't pass this course. And still later, I can't get the kind of job that I want. It is so easy to say I can't. Now, when Paul says, I can, we have to consider that in its context. It's not an absolute statement that he's making. Think of where he was. He can't leave and go where he wants to. He can't just do anything in the world, but he can, he said, do all things through Christ who strengthens me. In the Olympic Games in the summer, a 65-year-old man cannot pole vault 22 feet. A 6-year-old child cannot run a 4-minute mile. Those are things that cannot be done. But I love the spirit. I can. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. A mother may have helped by working very hard send her children to college. And when it's all over, she says, I have wanted to go to college all of my life and I'm going. And she graduates halfway through her life. Don't you love that kind of spirit? Sammy Davis Jr. was a black entertainer belonging to another generation. When he was trying to enter into the entertainment field, it was not easy for somebody in his situation to be a success. And while I would not condone everything that he said or did, I love his spirit. When he wrote his autobiography, you know what he called it? Yes, I can. And I'll tell you, people who are positive and who believe that they can accomplish more than they're now doing will do more than those who don't make that kind of commitment. Today, I want to talk with you about, yes, I can. And I want us to look at this passage that Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 4. where the line is found, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. First of all, let's do an analysis of just that statement. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. First, I can. That was his confidence. He believed it. He said, I can do all things. Now, he couldn't leave jail, but he could do everything that he needed to do. He could do that which was of greatest importance. And that really is what he was about in his entire life, whether it was traveling among the churches or planting new churches or being confined to a prison. What needed to be done, he could do. Things of greatest importance he could accomplish. I can do all things. But then he said, through him, that is through Christ, who strengthens me, because that was his power. Had he not been able to make the last part of that statement, he couldn't have made the first. But because of Christ, he said, I can do all things. Now let's make an application of that and look at it in the context of Philippians chapter 4. There are some things that Paul mentions here that all of us can do that are not easy, but they're possible through him who strengthens us. Let's look at the text in Philippians 4 and let's begin in the first verse. And what I want to emphasize here is in Paul's analysis, he spoke some words that we all need to accept. In his application, he will show us what that means in our daily lives. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And when he begins the part that we have in this 4th chapter, he emphasizes that we can deal with our disagreements. I told you it wasn't easy. One of the most difficult things that we're called upon to do is to get along with each other. And we can deal with our disagreements through the power of Christ. Notice what he says. Therefore, my brothers, whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm thus in the Lord, my beloved. Stand first in the Lord. Stand steadfast in the Lord. And being steadfast in the Lord equips us to be able to do all things through him who strengthens us. Now, Paul deals with a disagreement in the Philippian church. This is quite remarkable, too, because the church at Philippi had been planted by Paul. He had a special relationship with it, as we're going to notice in a moment, and he loved it. He loved this church. And as a matter of fact, in this little letter that he writes to the Philippians, it is a positive letter throughout. What he says in it is summarized when in this very chapter he says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I will say rejoice. This is a message of joy to people he loved. And this church had few problems, but it did have this problem. He said, I implore or entreat, I am begging for this to take place. I entreat Euodia, and I entreat Syntyche, to agree in the Lord. I don't know another thing about it, but I know that these two women in the Philippian church were not getting along together. And it's interesting as to what their names are. Notice Euodia. Her name means beautiful words. But there no doubt have been words spoken between Euodia and Syntyche that were not beautiful. And Syntyche's name means coming together. And they were not coming together, they were separating. And this was causing a tremendous problem in the church. First of all, the problem existed because they didn't love each other enough. After all, did not Jesus say, "This is the way all men are going to know that you're my disciples if you love one another"? A lot of the difficulties that arise among brethren could be satisfied if we loved each other more. Now, because they were not demonstrating love and they were dividing from each other, they were causing a problem for the unity of the church in Philippi. And did not Jesus say, "May they all be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they may be one in us, that the world may believe that you have sent me"? Here it is, love so that everybody will know you're my disciples. Be united so the world will know who I am. And Euodia and Syntyche were interrupting that. And Paul said, I'm pleading with them to agree in the Lord. Yes, I ask you also, true companion. True companion. We really don't know for sure what that refers to. It could refer to the church at Philippi. They were Paul's companions. But the Greek word that Paul uses here may be a personal name. A personal name that, in this instance, would mean companion. There might have been some particular person in the church that Paul is asking to help heal the wounds of these two women. But he does appeal to somebody at Philippi to help. He says, these women have labored side by side with me in the gospel together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers. He says in this context, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And it begins with dealing with our differences. Now, there are some areas in which we're all alike. When we are Christians, when we are a part of the Lord's church, we all are brothers and sisters. We all are reconciled to God. But we do come from different backgrounds. We do have different likes and dislikes. And those do not disappear when we become Christians. But we must learn to work together, to love each other, and be united. And there are three things that Paul observes right here that will help in dealing with difficulties. The first is, our names are in the book of life. That's verse 3. We're on our way to heaven. We need to act like it. Our names are written in the book of life. In verse 4, he says, let your reasonableness, which means graciousness, be known to everybody. As Christians, we need to treat each other with grace. And then third, he says, the Lord is at hand. Now, he's not here particularly talking about the second coming of Christ, but he is saying that the Lord is present. And the Lord is with us to help us deal with whatever comes our way. Our names are written in the book of life. We are the recipients of grace and need to show grace. And the Lord will help us. Work out your difficulties, Paul says. And you can do it, as he put it, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Oh, but you don't know what he did, or you don't know what she said. Forget that, because what we do to each other doesn't even start to compare with what we all have done to God. So we need to get on with the business of being a Christian. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. I can deal with my distresses. Now, the second thing that Paul mentions in context here is that in a world that is filled with trouble, God will give me the strength to rejoice. Look at verse 4. This is a summation of the whole letter, by the way. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Paul is in jail. He's saying, rejoice in the Lord. Rejoice always, and again I say, rejoice. Let your reasonableness or your graciousness be known to everybody. The Lord is at hand. And do not be anxious about anything, but in everything pray. He's helping us deal with life as it is. Now, the third thing in this context is to stop worrying. He uses the word that is translated in English, anxious, and he says, do not be anxious in anything, and that's just the same as saying, don't worry about anything. Why do we worry? Well, we worry because of fear. We are fearful of the past, that we didn't do all that we should have done, or that we didn't do it right, and we worry about the future, that we may not do what needs to be done in the future, and that therefore we, in our fear of the past and the future, ruin the present. Do not be anxious in anything. Do not worry about anything. We shouldn't worry about things that we can't do anything about. What good does it do to worry about something you can't change? You can wring your hands from now on, but it won't change anything that you're dealing with if you can't change it. Why would we worry about things we can change? Why not change them? Why not work on the situation that's before us? Out of fear, we are anxious. And we worry about the past, we worry about the future, and we worry in the present. And there are those, I'm convinced, that worry if they don't have something to worry about. Here's what Paul says. Do not worry about anything, but in everything pray. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything through prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And notice, and the peace of God will keep your hearts. Don't worry, but pray. Turn that over to God. And the peace of God will keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. What can I do? I can deal with difficulties that I may have with another. I can be filled with joy in a world filled with trouble. And I can give up anxiety. I should include right here, there is a difference in anxiety that Paul's talking about and concern. You can be concerned about your child's education and whether you're going to be able to send your child to college. Now, you can do one of two things about that. You can sit down and wring your hands, or you can be making preparation for the time when he goes to college to be able to help. But worrying about it doesn't change anything. In nothing be anxious, in everything pray, and the peace of God will keep your hearts. Now, the next thing in context is that I can talk right. Here's what Paul says. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is of good report, think on these things. Now, we may be wondering, what do all those things mean? True, honorable, just, pure, lovely, of good report. Let me tell you, what it means is think good thoughts. Think the right thoughts. Because what you think is what you are. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So think right. The last thing he mentions here as he is making application of I can do all things through him who strengthens me is he wants us to find contentment. How many of your troubles, you suppose, have come because you're not content? You're either not content where you are, you're not content in what you have, you're just plain not content. And a person may say, you know, if I had this, I'd be content. No, you wouldn't. John D. Rockefeller was, I suppose, one of the richest people that ever came on the American scene. And he was asked, how much does it take to be content? He said, a little bit more. He's right about that, you know. Somebody put it like this. If you're not content with the $1.50 you have, you're probably not going to be content if you have $1 million. There's a lot to be considered in that. Here is Paul in prison, and he's content. And it's here that he gives us some insight into how he feels about the Philippians. Beginning in verse 10, he said, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. Now, Paul, remember, has planted this church. They are some of his favorite people. And yet he says to them, after a period of time, you begin to show your concern for me again, as though they didn't want to help him for a given period. But we need to read on to find the reason for it. He said, your concern for me has been revived. That means they had concern for him. You indeed were concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. They didn't know where Paul was all the time. He was a traveler. And now he has been all the way over to Jerusalem. He's traveled all the way to the other side of the Roman Empire and is in jail in Rome. And the Philippians have lost contact with him. Remember, they didn't have cell phones. They don't know where he is all the time. But they've discovered where he is. They've discovered that he's in Rome. They're always concerned for him because they've always loved him, and they want to help him by sending him a gift. Maybe it's money to pay the rent. He was in prison, but he was in a rented house under guard. Maybe they wanted to help him with his daily needs. But they had no opportunity. But he said, not that I'm speaking of being in need, for I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low. I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. And it's right there, they said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And come down to verse 14. Yet it was kind of you to share my trouble. That is, they comforted him in his trouble. And you Philippians yourselves know that at the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you. You only. The Philippians from the very start, chapter 1, verse 5 of this letter says, you've been with me from the beginning. From the very beginning of the gospel coming to Philippi, the Philippians supported Paul in his work, even financially. And there had been a time when they lost track of him and they couldn't help him, but now they're about to help him again. It was kind of you to share my trouble. Nobody helped me except you. Even in Thessalonica, he said, you sent me help for my needs once and again. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek fruit to your account. Now get that. Do you know whenever we send a gift to one of our preachers in Africa or in India or in Europe, any good that they accomplish is to your account. It's chalked up in your favor. God doesn't forget any gift of goodness that we share with somebody else. He said, I really am glad that you're helping me, and it's not so much I need the help as I want to bear fruit to your account. I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied. Now watch, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. They'd already begun to send gifts again. And these are the gifts that you sent. And notice what he says about those gifts. A fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. Now, they could have said, we didn't give that to God, we gave it to Paul. But the gift to Paul came before God as a sacrifice well-pleasing to him. Have you ever made a sacrifice for the cause of Christ? If you can say yes, then that sacrifice came up before God as something acceptable to him and something that he will never forget. Paul makes his statement about himself, and I'm confident his statement for all of us. He makes it practical. He not only states a principle, but he applies it. Because right now, where I am, I can learn how to better get along with you. I can learn right now how to face up to living in a world like this one. I can do something. I can do something to improve my spiritual life by overcoming my anxieties. You see, all of this is practical stuff. I can start thinking right. And I can start saying, in whatever state I find myself, I'm content. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to make advancement. It does not mean that I'm not going to climb the ladder. It just means that I'm going to be happy now and then. I will not be happy when, I'll be happy then. Now, the last thing here is an appeal. And the appeal really is threefold. The first is that Paul says, I can do all things through Him, through Christ who strengthens me. Do you believe that, or do you believe it's not true? And if it's true for Him, why can't it be true for us? And to make it personal, why can't it be true for me? Why can't it be true for you? So, is this something that is true? Okay, do I believe it? And finally, what am I going to do about it? You know, whenever we study the Bible, whether it be in class or through sermon or in our personal study, we need to always have before us, how can I live this out? What does this really mean to me? What am I going to do about it? I can do everything that needs to be done through Christ who strengthens me, whatever that is. For some of us, it may be that we, by the power of the blood of Christ, need to be forgiven of sin because we're not yet Christians, but you can do that if you choose to do it today. As a part of this church family, you can say, I'm going to do better than I'm doing. And you can do that by making the choice, and Christ will help you do it. But if we don't make choices, then what is it that we're doing? Let's choose to be what God wants us to be, and let's choose today. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. Let's stand.